Okay, so everyone's able to turn their videos on still, the participants?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, I love to hear it. Then with that, we will begin with our first speaker of the proposition.
Can you hear me well? Can you see me well? Take that as a yes. Okay. Hello and good day to the opposition, to everybody watching this debate, to our judges, and to my teammates from the proposition. I am the first speaker of the proposition, and I would like to present our case first. We, as the House, would ban individuals credibly accused of corruption from running for public office. Let me first define some terms. By this House, we mean the Bulgarian government. By credibly accused, we mean specifically accused with evidence that unambiguously leads to the verity of the accusation. By corruption, we mean abuse of power for personal gain when in a position of power. Public office is a position of authority or service involving responsibility to the public, especially within the government. And running for public office, in our case, means simply enlisting as a candidate in an election for said office. Now, how would we do this? How would we find which individuals running for public office could be credibly accused of corruption? This is how. We're going to oblige the reports of corruption from independent, trusted third-party sources, for example, journalists, to be properly investigated by the police, and we can then determine which candidates are corrupt and which are not. If the candidate is proven to be innocent, they can still run for public office. If the candidate is corrupt, then they will not be able to run for public office. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why? Here's why. Here are our first two arguments. Number one, with introducing this ban, there will be less corruption in office. When accused of corruption, individuals can no longer run for it and therefore also hold it. Democratic society has to ensure a just vote for and by just people. Therefore, corrupt people running and holding office goes against the principles of democracy and harms society. Them being able to run for office can also be harmful, since the lack of such a ban normalizes corruption in politics in the long run. And don't listen to the opposition when they tell you that introducing such a ban would actually be harmful to the democratic society. No, that is wrong. As we just said, allowing corrupt individuals will undermine the integrity of elections. Let me finish my argument first. Will undermine the integrity of elections and thus undermine the democratic process as well. Yes, please go on with your POI.
By your definition, these individuals would have been proven by the police. Therefore, they're not only credible, but they are proven, all right? Goes outside the bounds of the debate. And besides that, those who are proven are taken to court where the status quo stands. That is not within your side of the debate.
In our case, credible accusation is can only be done after the case is finished, since in the words unambiguously leads to the verity of accusation, this unambiguousness can only be determined after a court case. So the mechanism goes well within our definition of credibly accused. Now onto our second argument. Allowing individuals credibly accused of corruption to run for public office makes voters apathetic towards the morals of the people they'd like to be represented by and towards the voting process itself. This leads to low voter turnout, and low voter turnout makes the vote much easier to manipulate. We've seen what happens when corrupt individuals run for public office. For example, in Bulgaria, where the debate is actually situated, we have many corrupt individuals running for public office, and as we can see, the election activity results from the past 3 elections, the one in April, the one in July, and here the one in November, have been astoundingly low. We actually hit a critical minimum in the 11th July election with as little as 27.5% of the people actually bothering to go and vote. From a legal standpoint, when such a little percentage of the population votes, such as the 27.5% registered in July, votes would matter as more than thrice as much as they are intended to matter, with near 100% voter activity. And from a social standpoint, the election would also be deemed illegitimate, because with 27.5% of eligible voters actually going out and voting, this would mean that 72.5% of eligible voters didn't vote. Thus, more people, a lot more people, more than 50% of people have actually decided not to vote for anyone, and than to vote for any of the candidates. And so this, in our eyes, would deem the election illegitimate, mainly because the actual biggest results that any of the option has had is nobody. We've seen also what happens with such low voter turnout. Votes are manipulated more easily simply because there are less votes to manipulate. And also, actually, you know why we had those 3 elections the same year? Because for 2 of those elections, and let's hope not the 3rd, but for 2 of those elections, the government wasn't able to form the parliament wasn't able to form a stable government and a set of ministers. This is why we had to vote thrice. And as statistics go, the voter activity has been lowering from April to July. April's 36% compared to July's 27.5%. I would like to reiterate once again. I think this concludes my speech. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the first speaker of the opposition.
Just a second so I can write some things down. There's a lot to cover.
Okay, a couple more seconds, then we got to get started.
Yeah. No, I'll just start right away. Okay. 3. Just give me a second to do something. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, I'm the first speaker of the opposition, and I'll start my speech right off by arguing the definitions. Because we as the opposition would like to state that in this debate, we are going to be arguing and focusing on the word believable, which is directly correlated and a synonym of the word credible. If you don't believe this, or if the proposition doesn't believe this, let me just state that Merriam-Webster dictionary defines credible as something that is likely to be believable. Likely to be believable is not true, does not correlate to something being true, and believable does not equal factual. We believe that the proposition kind of missed the point of the debate there. And so, also adding to this, just because the public believes something does not mean it is true, because in this case, credible, believable means that the public and the wider region believes that something is like that. Okay. Just because the public believes something, it does not mean that it is true. Okay. Now that's out of the way, I would like to set some other definitions and argue there is credibly accused, someone thought to be corrupt and accepted in media outlets as such, the things that do retell information to the people, who then decide on whether they are credibly or believably accused. Further on, this house is Bulgaria, something that the proposition mentioned. We would like to disagree, seeing how this is a worldwide issue that concerns every single nation. This could not be correct. Further on, unambiguous means not open for interpretation. Again, this is not related to the debate bounds. We have already said them completely correctly. The debate bounds are credibly accused, which means believable, and that's that. Okay. With all of that out of the way, let's begin with some counters. First off, their method. Our second speaker already mentioned this in the POI, but when the police is involved, the law is directly involved, which means that the system would not change, and that means that the status quo remains the same, which would mean a lack of new system being implemented and the opposition, being, I would like to say correct, but that's a bit pretentious. Okay, continuing on. Seeing how there is no change, that would mean opposition is right. Okay, yeah, what is it?
We don't mean that there would be no change, because as we stated, we're expecting from third parties to take upon the responsibility to actually report to the police and legal authorities if there is corruption, if they notice something.
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, that is still those people who believe or credibly accuse people of that corruption. We can never be certain that the public opinion is completely correct. So, and also that is how things are right now. People do report to the police and the police disinvestigate. So that just, you're not changing the status quo in any way. Okay, with all that out of the way, the argument about election and voters, again, is outside of the bounds of the debate. We're talking about corrupt politicians being banned. We're not talking about elections or voters, so that is not within the bounds of the debate. Okay. With all that out of the way, let's introduce our first argument, which is that proposition does have some ground for reasoning. Yes, corruption is a bad thing. We are not going to argue that. However, their methodology is particularly flawed. And allow me to explain why. So, our first argument is exactly that people can misuse their power of public persecution. So what does that exactly mean? Well, the implementation of such a procedure would give a lot of power to those who wish to quickly dispose of political enemies. In the modern day and age, it is exceedingly easy to sway the media to your side and paint a corrupt picture of an individual you wish to be targeted. Our third speaker will give further examples of this, but for now, just keep this in mind. As I give a quote from the European Journal of Political Research about argumentation and examples. An interest group, such as a political party or politician, that strongly favors a specific policy but is unable to convince decision makers of it, may try to have an indirect impact on decision making by mobilizing and shaping public opinion. It can do so by using both new and traditional media, sending leaflets to households, or holding a rally. How interest groups influence public opinion. Argumentation matters more than the sources. This is a direct quote, I repeat, from the European Journal of Political Research. Can't really argue with that much. So, what can we really do about corruption? Well, our second speaker will talk much further in depth about this. However, for now, I'd like to mention that there is already a system in place to deal with corruption and corrupt politicians. I'll just read it off here. There is already a legal mechanism in place for that. If an individual really is corrupt, which again, not believable, not credible, they are proven to be corrupt. Then will the opposition see no problem in turning to court and taking the necessary legal steps to stop that person's actions? However, the labeling and persecution that can come about after such a policy change far outweighs the few bad apples that may be rotten out through it. So, to recap this argument, we believe that there already is a system in place and that if we do implement what the proposition is proposing, a change to the status quo, it would result only in people getting banned for unjust reasons because the politic thinks that something is the way that they think it is, which is, again, credible or believable, not true. Okay, with that being said, we're going to move on to our second argument, which is that this just gives corrupt politicians more incentive to further root corruption and hide off better from the eyes of the judicial bodies. So let me just give a direct quote, direct thought from the National Institute of Justice, the US Department of Justice, in 5 things about deterrence. Increasing the severity of punishment does little to deter crime, which in turn leads to the certainty of being caught being a vastly more powerful deterrent than the punishment. So, running that back again, the harsher the punishment for a crime, the more the incentive there is for people to hide out and be more concealed through it. So, in turn, you might say that implementing this change that the proposition is suggesting would result in less corruption being detected and thus the system not working properly, because the politicians will just be hiding out more and wouldn't really be showing anything related to corruption at all. They'll become some sort of corruption experts, you might say. So finishing off, I'll mention something quickly that our second speaker will talk about in his speech. It is that our current system helps politicians rehabilitate because it is not legal for a public official to run for office while they are on trial, which gives them that much wanted time for rehabilitation. And of course, they will be talking about our third argument, which is about the root of the problem. Thank you for listening to my speech, and have a good rest of the debate.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Next, we will hear from the second speaker of the proposition.
So, dear judges, dear audience, dear opposition team, I am the second speaker of the proposition team, and in my speech, I would like to do some rebuttal on the points that the opposition team made, as well as introduce our third and fourth argument on this motion. Starting off with rebuttal. What the first speaker of the opposition team said is that in this way our methodology is flawed, and what we do is we give people power for disposal of their political rivals. However, and they mentioned something about only a few bad apples in the system not proving much and not giving us grounds to introduce this ban. However, I would like to ask you if first of all, if we don't introduce this ban, is it better to have corrupt politicians in politics than to have singular cases of politicians not being banned, even if they what the fuck am I talking? Than to have singular cases of politicians being banned unrightfully. What their first speaker also said is that believable is a very close synonym to the word credible. We do agree with that, and if something is believable to the general public, to the voters, therefore it should be investigated, and especially when we're talking about corruption, something should be done about it. Especially if reports for corruption are coming from journalists and not just a random person on the street, since this is what we included in our definition. We did not say a random person, but a unbiased third party such as journalists. And now on to no, thank you. And now on to what their first speaker mentioned about the fact that a harsh punishment will make them just hide better. Well, do you propose that we just don't punish them at all? What would that change in a situation? No, thank you. With corruption. And now moving on to our third and fourth argument. Our third argument states as followed: allowing corrupt or accused of corruption individuals to run for public office brings down the overall credibility of a country, regardless of whether these individuals are voted in or not. Allowing them to run for office gives them grounds for said corruption to continue, and can also very negatively affect a country's foreign policy. For example, since you said we're not arguing Bulgaria, sure, I would like to introduce an example with the European Union. Secret money laundering and corruption in the Balkan countries risk derailing the bid for countries like Albania, Serbia, North Macedonia, and Montenegro to join the European Union. This is according to Voice of American News. And all of this corruption is currently happening under the table. So just imagine if someone credibly accused of corruption is allowed to run for office publicly, or even possibly being elected. This, as we said, just brings down the credibility and national prestige of our country. And now on to our fourth argument: allowing credibly accused of corruption individuals run for public office or even hold it can lead to extreme public outrage, such as protests, riots, or even other countries internationally getting involved in the country's politics. An example that I would like to give to illustrate that argument is the situation with Delan Peevski, one of Bulgaria's very bright examples of a corrupt politician that wasn't necessarily sued, didn't have a lawsuit against. No, he wasn't proven to be corrupt. However, what happened when he was introduced in the government, there were public outrages. Protests happened for nearly 200 consecutive days. Have you seen any other examples such as that one? And another thing, in terms of other countries getting involved in Bulgaria's political life, the USA even implemented the Magnitsky Act mechanism to sanction him this year in June 2021. And with that I would once again like to remind you that allowing individuals credibly accused of corruption to run for public office is harmful for Bulgaria's political situation as well as to society in general. With that, I would like to conclude my speech. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we will hear from the second speaker of the opposition.
Hi, just few seconds. Have a lot of papers here. Okay, I am just about done. Now begin in 3, 2, 1. Hello, I am the second speaker of the opposition team, and without wasting time, I'll just start by rebuttaling the things that the second speaker of the proposition has said, and continuing to enforce our point, really. First of all, I believe that they really just agreed to our definition of credible being equal to believable, and I believe that gives a strong argument to our side. So I'll continue using that definition of credible equals believable, and believable does not necessarily equal factual. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, they said, they asked me a question which I tried to answer in a POI. Do we not punish them at all? Do we not punish these corrupt people, as the proposition says, at all? No, we punish them. But they don't just have to be believed to be corrupt. Anyone can be believed to be corrupt. And as our first speaker said, in this day and age, it's becoming increasingly easy to sway public opinion and make the people believe that someone is corrupt. Right? POI. Yes.
You said that we did agree with the definition of credible not equaling exactly believable and proven, and we do agree, although that believable might not mean factual, but also if it's believable or credible, as we said, we would investigate regardless.
Thank you. That was quite a long POI, but I'll still answer it. Yes, they will be investigated. That is the status quo, mind you. People can lead investigations. Journalists can lead investigations. They can cooperate with the police. The matter is, do those investigations find something? And is that an argument for the proposition side to make? So, credibly accused does not equal proven. If someone leads an investigation and proves someone to be corrupt, then we proceed as per the status quo, make a court case, prove our examples, and that person is deprived of the right for 2 years, according to Bulgarian law, of the right to run for public office for 2 years, then is rehabilitated, after which the right is reinstated. So there is a mechanism already in place for this, and this is for our side, the status quo. What they are proposing already exists. They're not proposing anything new. They're not sticking to the motion of outright banning people credibly accused and just credibly accused. The fourth argument was about public outrage. Individuals who are corrupt and are elected will face public outrage. Yes, but in a small myriad of cases. Like, let's say, for example, Putin, who is someone who has been thrown with many credible accusations. We had this whole scandal with Navalny going on. Is Putin being widely protested and hanged on the streets? So, no, the public outrage is not always the case. Xi Jinping, the leader of the Communist Party of China, is public outrage going to take him down? No. And we believe their arguments have just been supporting our case for the entirety of the debate. And with that in mind, I will reinforce our side's arguments, which is per the status quo. Our first speaker talked about how the power to ban people just by being credibly accused is going to be misused a lot. And it can be, and it will be misused a lot. Because, as he cited, the European Journal of Political Research, any interest group, this includes political parties or people running for any kind of public office, will be incentivized to use public opinion against their opponents. And when that public opinion is actually viable in court, which is what the proposition is suggesting, we run into a whole myriad of problems because the people can be and they will be persuaded. And he also said in our third argument that this is incentive to root corruption and hide better. To which they tried to argue, no, later in my speech, if I have time, thank you. To which they tried to argue that, well, is it better to just not punish them? To which I said, no, we can't punish them if there is factual evidence. Now, I'll be introducing our third argument, which our first speaker hinted at, which is that instead of outright banning the consequence, we should tackle the root of the problem. We agree with the proposition that corruption is a big problem. Yes, but their methodology is flawed. Their solution is not practical. They have not proven it to be practical. They have not given examples of how it would work, how it would be handled in court, how these people would be banned, and how anything would work at all. So by enforcing the status quo, we will not only do so, but we will admit that we can make some slight changes which are not what the proposition is proposing. As per the Prevention, Detection, Correction, and Corruption in Local Government from the National Criminal Justice Reference Service in US, management of public organizations must be concerned with the opportunity and incentive for corruption. No public organization is inherently exempt, and past avoidance says nothing about the future. It is up to management to establish, management in this case being the Supreme Court of Justice, for example, to establish an environment that will make corruption unlikely and a system that will provide corrective action where needed and incorporate the lessons of experience. What we're saying through this example is we must tackle corruption at its root cause. We must change the system in a way and we must change the procedures for tackling corruption, but not in the way that the proposition is suggesting. We live in an age plagued by a pandemic of misinformation, as is labeled by many outlets such as Mayo Clinic and Scientific American. And this age of misinformation is really dangerous considering what the proposition is proposing. Because in an age of misinformation and in an age where public opinion can be swayed easily, that public opinion being justifiable in court to ban someone from running for public office is really dangerous. We as the proposition want to actuate that, and we want to actuate on the proposition's flawed methodology. So, right, I believe in my speech, I tackled their methodology enough. And I said that, yes, we acknowledge there are some problems with the system currently. However, those problems cannot be fixed by what the proposition is suggesting. And they will not be fixed by what the proposition is suggesting. Instead, they will be fixed by battling the root of the corruption and changing the system in a way that it does not incentivize corruption. And as we said, a harsher punishment, our first speaker said that, does little to deter the crime. So we must look for other solutions, and we must strengthen the bodies that research and investigate corruption, rather than strengthen the bodies that just punish any credible accusations. With that out of the way, I will end my speech by just quickly giving the floor to our third speaker, who will give some examples and statistics to really solidify our case of why the proposition's idea is really flawed and bad. And thank you for your attention. Bye.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the third proposition speaker.
Can you see me and hear me well?
Yeah.
Hello to our dearest judges. Hello to the opposition team and to our spectators. As the third speaker of the proposition, I would like to start with some rebuttal, and then I'm going to move to the clash points of this debate. Firstly, I want to address a term about flawed methodology, which was thrown our way countless times. I'm not really sure if our words are being twisted or we're just not properly explaining the methodology. But our point was that if, again, like we said, an unbiased third party, we're not saying the general public, we're not saying our neighbor or something like that. We're saying actual people whose jobs have to do with journalism and politics and stuff like that. Those people, like you said, they can always lead investigations if they want to, of course. But our point was that we would actually give this like as a responsibility to them, so it would be something that they would be appointed to do, whether by the news outlets that they're, I guess, parts of, or just by like the government as a whole. We did not specify that, so I'm not going to really get into this, but we meant that these people would have it as their responsibility to do that, and they wouldn't just do it out of the good of their hearts. So this would be a change in the status quo. Aside from this, something that I wanted to again say is that you made a good point, by the way, about misinformation these days, and I would like to agree with that. We will not be lying to the public or something like that. This is never our intention. If a journalist reports a certain politician as, for corruption, this will be investigated by the police. We suggested that in the beginning with our first speaker, I believe, and this is something that that the opposition just said at the end of their last speech, but this is something that we suggested in the beginning, so it's like you are also enforcing one of our points. We will not be lying to the public again. We will not be changing the public's opinion, because when somebody is accused of something, the police doesn't really release that to the public unless these stuff are like confirmed, at least. And this is also something that I just wanted to mention. You spoke about root of the issue, but I did not really hear what that root was exactly. Something else that I wanted to, yes, I'm just going to again go really quickly over our rebuttals of the other side's arguments. So one of your arguments was again that we, through this ban, we would give power for disposal of political rivals. However, again, we said that this wouldn't be something that anyone could do, like file a report just like that. Again, we are trying to get people who are unbiased, and this is why we suggested journalists. Of course, that would be something that would again probably have to get checked at some point, but again, we did not talk about that. So your point was that generally this ban could be misused, and then you spoke about like a few bad apples. But I wanted to say that, just like our second speaker said, sometimes it can be much worse for politics for one corrupt person to be in politics than for one non-corrupt person to not be in politics. I hope I'm making sense with this one. Something else that you guys said was about how harsh punishment will just make people hide better. Well, this is true. I don't think this is a valid argument at all, because punishment should be hard when necessary, and whether people will try to hide better shouldn't matter at all in this case. You also did not show any evidence for that, which, again, did not really get that point. Secondly, we agreed with our point of believable, and in our POI, one of my fellow teammates said that believable, while believable might not equal factual, we proposed investigation. We proposed to check whether, whether this is actually factually correct, right? This was something that we've been introducing since the beginning. I think this is pretty much all the arguments of the opposition that I have written down with our rebuttals, so I'm just going to move to our arguments and their rebuttals of them. Firstly, I would like to say that, again,
POI.
we believe that, I'm sorry, once I'm done. Thank you. Our team line is that allowing individuals credibly accused of corruption, to run for public office is harmful to Bulgaria's political situation and to society in general. We have managed to prove this, I believe. So our first argument has to do with how this ban will lead to less corruption in politics in the long run, as it won't normalize them. And I guess I didn't catch really a rebuttal to that, other than the fact that you called our methodology flawed. And I don't think you frankly understood our mechanism from the beginning, but maybe that was on us. Then I would like to again refer to the example that we had about Denislav, who was never really like sued for something. But again, like we mentioned, there was still outrage about him because there has been evidence that he's done something incorrectly. And even though court didn't do its job in this case, that was still something that happened. And this is why we would propose this system with more credible third parties to actually report and then for the police to investigate. And this is, again, different from the status quo. Our second argument had to do with the fact that the lack of such a ban would make voters apathetic, which in turn, this would lead to possible vote manipulation and inability to create parliament. Now, you said that we're not talking about voting in parliament, and while yes, we are not, this is just the impact of the lack of such a ban, because people get discouraged to vote since they think that all their choices are corrupt. This is why we brought that up, and just saying that it's irrelevant to the debate was really not grasping our point at all, and I don't think that was a valid rebuttal. Our third point had to do with how this lack of a ban, how the lack of this ban, I'm sorry, brings down the credibility and national prestige of a country, and that negatively affects its foreign policy. I don't think we really got anything in reply to this. Yeah, I don't really have anything for that. And then our fourth argument had to do with how this is like the other side of the same coin. It would affect a country's domestic policy because it could cause like public outrage, riots, etc. And we gave again our example of Denislav. I don't think that was really addressed, other than you saying that it's true, but it happens rarely, which you did not really provide us with any evidence of. And then your Putin and I think you said like China's leader example, I think these were just not well put together. And also there are pretty much people who are still against those people being in charge. And again, if they are investigated and proven to be, if we impose our method and they're investigated and proven to be corrupt, then legal action will be taken as usual by the status quo, which is what you said. So pretty much, I think my summary would be that we did not get any reply to one of our arguments. It wasn't really addressed. Two of our arguments were poorly addressed, and one of them was kind of addressed, kind of just misunderstood, in my opinion. So I think this is overall our clash points for this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the third opposition speaker.
Yes, just a moment to turn on my camera. Just a few seconds for me to revise my notes very quickly. Okay, just let me put on my timer and I will now begin. Hello everyone, my name is Malena Malcheva. I am the third speaker of the opposition team today. So how my speech will go, basically I will provide you with an entire overview of the whole debate so far. And by doing this, I will go over the speeches of the proposition team and going over the arguments, the main clash points of this debate, and explain why we have won them over. With that explained and out of the way, I will now begin. Starting with the first speech of the proposition team, their first argument was that there will be less corruption. There is no direct correlation to this, I believe, and I don't believe they have proven that throughout the debate that there is a direct correlation. Yes, it is the term that they have thrown out there, but there's no direct proof. Then their second argument was that it makes voters apathetic, and that a large percentage of voters haven't voted because they didn't trust anybody in the most recent elections. Again, no direct correlation whatsoever. And also, even if even if there was a correlation, nothing proves that the measures that the proposition house is proposing will actually fix that. And also, not really, because as my previous speaker said, I will provide us with some examples for our arguments. I will actually introduce the example now. Our example was Kirill Petkov from the political party We Continue the Change in Bulgaria. There was a scandal with him having a Canadian passport, I think. And that's what it was a huge outbreak, if you guys remember, a huge outrage of journalists, media, and so on. And they won the elections. So the people didn't really care about his Canadian citizenship that much, even though it is considered corrupt. I will expand more on that later when talking about other arguments. Then the first speaker also mentioned that in Bulgaria, a parliament couldn't be formed 2 times because of this. Actually, the parliament couldn't be formed because the winners had nobody to do a coalition with. So again, there is no direct correlation to the corruption, to the voters being apathetic, to the parliament not being created. No, the voters did their jobs during the elections. The parties couldn't form a coalition. Then moving on to the second speech of opposition, proposition. I'm sorry. They asked, is it better to have corrupted politicians? As we said with our argument, they will just hide it better. So their measure doesn't prevent corrupt politicians from already being in the country, in the government. And also something that I believe is a main flashpoint in this debate was that they will count it as credible if it's accused by a journalist. Since when are journalists credible factual sources? I do not want to. I'm sorry if anyone is a journalist out here, but these things are not proven by data, by statistics, and so on. They can be, but a single statement from a journalist is not a credible source. Also, keeping our argument in mind about other politicians misusing this and calling other politicians out just to throw them out of the government, for example, these journalists can, surprise, also be bribed. So another politician can bribe the journalist to write this and this and that in the article, and this can create a huge scandal for the politician who they're attacking. So yet again, this just proves that journalists are not credible sources. Moving on from that, I will probably expand on it more again. So their third argument was that it brings down the credibility of the country. Well, imagine we had a corrupt politician. He gets punished for it. He redeems himself. Later on my speech, if I have time, thank you. He redeems himself after a certain period of time, and then he comes back into the government. He's learned from his mistake, and the government runs smoothly. As with our example with Kirill Petkov, his Canadian citizenship didn't stop him from winning the elections and winning over the hearts of people. Because in a YouTube interview done by the YouTuber Flora, Kirill Petkov states that when they were in Dobrich, I believe, for their political campaign, the people, when he asked them about his Canadian citizenship, they said, no, we don't really care about that. We care about what you're going to do with the country if you win. So people don't really care that much about stuff like that. And if the measures that the proposition team is proposing did actually happen, Kirill Petkov would not be approved in parliament. And of course, this is a matter of a personal political opinion, but as things are going, Kirill Petkov's party is actually doing pretty good so far, in my personal opinion. Don't know if you guys agree to this. So if the measures proposed by the proposition were indeed implemented, he would not have been in parliament right now. And then regarding their example of Dilan Peevski, later if I have time, thank you. Regarding their example about Dilan Peevski, they themselves said that he wasn't proven to be corrupt, even though there are dozens of, actually hundreds of articles about him and his corruption. They stated it themselves. He's still not proven by law, by a lawsuit, that he is corrupted. So exactly, there is still corruption even if their measures are implemented, because corruption oftentimes cannot be proven, as is the case with Dilan Peevski. They have said it themselves. And regarding the third speech of the proposition team, again, the third speaker focused a lot on unbiased third party, meaning journalism. Journalists, well, again, as I said, they can be bribed, they're not credible, and also they can be biased because we have seen a ton of articles with biased journalists about politics and so on. Then the third speaker moved on to saying that they couldn't understand what us meaning by the root of the problem was. We meant that we should not be active, we should be proactive. And this means actually attacking the root of corruption, which comes within the actual government itself, and not punishing the politicians. Because by punishing them, well, then the next politician will come and he will be corrupt as well. What are we doing to actually fix corruption in itself, in the person? Nothing if we decide to implement the propositional thesis. And with our status quo, we mean to actually punish the person responsible so they can learn their mistake and redeem themselves for a better government and a better country, which we think is the ultimate thing we all stand for, right? Then the third speaker moved on to saying that whether people will hide better doesn't matter. It does. And she also mentioned that we can't provide examples of that. Well, obviously, we can't provide examples if they are hiding. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Then they said that we didn't have a source for us saying that increasing the severity of punishment does little to deter the crime. The source is the National Institute of Justice, as Denislav said. And also they said that discouraged voters, as we said, have no correlation. They said that this is the impact. Again, as I said, no direct correlation whatsoever to the voters being caused by corruption. I think this is pretty explanatory. And about the statement that there are people who are against Putin and China's leader, there will always be people who are against somebody. But I think what we all stand for in this debate is a better government and better country. And we don't think that banning these people has a direct correlation to this. As I say, I have no time left, so thank you for listening to my speech and have a great rest of the debate.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the opposition reply speaker.
That's gonna be me again. Okay. Just gonna set my timer. And I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Hello, everyone. I believe our third speaker did a fantastic job of going over the whole debate. So right now, what I'm gonna do for you is, you guessed it, paint the two worlds for you. How much we all love that. The world of the proposition and the world of the opposition. So the world of the proposition, as per their saying, is a world where people who are credibly accused are then persecuted by journalists, and then these journalists somehow their opinion stands true in court, and then these people are banned. Yeah, I believe our third speaker and throughout my speech as well, and the first speaker's speech as well, our first speaker's speech as well, we managed to actuate on the fact that this process is flawed and it's just not going to work. Because by not actually completely proving this with sources and data, but by proving it with the opinion of some journalist, as our third speaker said, you're bringing bias, you're bringing more corruption into the system and bribery, as our third speaker mentioned. And then let's move on to our world. Our world supports the status quo, but just to top it all off, we presented you with another solution, because why not? The status quo currently, as I said in my speech, someone is corrupt, they're proven in court with sources, data, whatever, and they go through a trial and then are rehabilitated. Our third speaker managed to actuate that in her speech that do we want a system that is reactive and just waits for corruption to happen, roots out someone here and there, accuses them, bans them, and gets done with it, wipes their hands clean? Or do we want a system that is fighting the root of the cause, a system that is not reactive but proactive, a system that improves their management and their resources for not encouraging corruption, and a system that works better for the people? That was an argument that was in the second and our third speech especially, that we and the people in general want a system that works well, and they really don't care much about some petty crime or something that is unclear, as we gave in the example with we continue the change. So really, what we want to actuate on is that we as voters, or I personally, or anyone here who is underage as future voters, want a system that functions properly and not a system that is focusing on punishment, not a system that is flawed in its core, but paints a pretty picture on the outside by doing some bannings. We want a system that works well in its core, and the proposition, we believe, has failed to provide such a system. We believe that their arguments were refuted sufficiently throughout all of our speeches. We said that their system, however credible they claim to be, it's just not proven. And we said, as our third speaker said, that it's more important for the people to have a functioning government than one that focuses on punishment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the last reply speaker from the proposition.
All right, everyone. As the reply speaker of the proposition theme, I would like to start off by thanking you for this debate. It has been a very wonderful, very productive debate, and I would like to very quickly go over some moments. And yeah, this entire debate, the opposition team has been twisting our words to fit their narrative without actually adequately responding to anything that we've said. They failed to even show us what the very often mentioned root of the problem is. I forgot to count how many times they used that phrase, but it doesn't really matter. I think it was at least 10, whatever. They introduced this example of Kirill Petkov's Canadian citizenship being a petty crime, and while we do agree that it was unconstitutional, it doesn't really fit our definition of corruption that they didn't say anything about. So we're gonna deem that irrelevant. I believe we managed to prove that not having this ban just reinforces corruption in public office, because it creates more space for corrupt politicians to enter office. And we've been trying here in Bulgaria to fight corruption with non-harsh punishments for around 3 decades now, and as we can see, results are not really visible yet. So maybe it is time for a harsher punishment, such as banning them from even running for public office. The lack of this ban also leads to much easier manipulation of votes. I believe we managed to prove that very well with the simple math of when low voter turnout because voters apathetic, the votes that have been bought by corrupt politicians weigh much more. You're doing so. I'm very sorry, my connection just cut off. And another thing that we believe is true in our current political situation, non-corrupt politicians can't survive because, as you said, the entire system is corrupt. Therefore, introducing this ban and removing credibly accused people of corruption is the only thing we're left to do to stop corruption from entering public office. The lack of such ban also very negatively affects our international relationships. And we managed to prove that it also causes public outrages. We don't think that any of our arguments were understood correctly or answered adequately by the opposition team. And with that, I would like to once again remind you that this ban is very necessary in our current political situation and is going to be beneficial for society in general. With that, I would like to conclude my speech. Thank you.
Great debate. Both teams, that was awesome. Thank you, spectators, for joining us. Judges, we will be meeting in the room 204 prop room to have our deliberation, and we will be back to just give some general feedback after that deliberation. So hang tight. Thank you all, and judges, I'll see you in a bit.